All right. Well, good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on what part of the world you're in. Welcome to our meditation town hall, and happy solstice to you all, where we are in this season of allowing more light in. It always confuses me. For whatever reason, I always think that the winter solstice is the time where it gets darker. So that's something for me to look into. And I'm always delighted that I'm wrong, and that it's the time where the light begins to increase. So interesting metaphor, I think, in terms of mindsets. So we're here today. I will be leading us in this meditation town hall, our second to last one of the year. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Kelley Amadei, and I am a longtime senior student of Lama Surya's. And for those of you who don't know, we will be continuing this beautiful practice into 2025. Myself, I will be leading, as well as other senior students, and we'll be continuing to have special guests. Lama Raja will be on. It's possible Lama Surya will come now and then. So we really hope that you continue to practice with us on these Sunday mornings. I think they're just such a gift to be able to connect in this way. So this is the second to last of the year. Next week, Lama Surya will be leading. And then the first week of January, I will be kicking us off, and then we'll go from there. So I'm just going to take you through a few logistics because some people have had some questions. So you'll continue to get the same email with the same registration link. None of that will change, at least for the next 6 months or so. And the format will stay the same. Everyone that shows up will teach in their own authentic way, lead in their own authentic way. And I would really love to encourage you, obviously, not only to continue, but to participate. And what I mean by participate is really, the last 5 to 10 minutes of every session, we do open it up for questions and sharing. And for those of you who have been on live retreat, which is probably most of you, whether it's with Lama Surya or another teacher, there's so much value that comes from somebody sharing or asking a question, because if you have something to share, somebody else probably can relate. And if you have a question, somebody else probably has that question. And so I just encourage you to push yourself slightly outside of your comfort zone. I think it's easier to raise our hand in the meditation hall and in the temple than it is on Zoom. But would really just love to hear from all of you as you're comfortable and able. So why don't we get started? Again, settle into your seat. Whatever is going to allow you to be the most present. I bow to you and the Buddha in your seat, your beautiful, loving presence. And we are going to begin with, I'm doing an all-in-one today, so pardon me for a moment while I pull up the prayer book. We are going to begin with the four immeasurable aspirations. And for those of you who've been on when I've led, these will be familiar to you, the four immeasurables and the four dharmas of Gampopa. And I love these for a few reasons. One, from a simplistic perspective, is, there's all kinds of reasons to chant these prayers in both Tibetan, Sanskrit, and English. And while I love chanting in Tibetan, I also like to start with these prayers that are only in English as a way to remove any obstacle that might exist for people who have a resistance to something that feels foreign to them, outside of them, different from them. So that's one reason. And then the second reason is these prayers are really the essence, in my opinion, the essence of what we're doing here. What we do in our practice, why we study, why we meditate, why we come together as a Sangha. And so as you either listen to the words or as you chant them along with me, I invite you to really drop down, I'm going to do it a little slowly, into each word and the presence with each word and the deep meaning. And these, between the two of them, 8 simple lines. Start with the 4 immeasurable aspirations. May all beings possess happiness and the inner causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the inner causes of suffering. May all beings remain undivided from the sacred joy which is free from suffering. May all beings come to rest in great peace and equanimity, beyond attachment and aversion to friends, enemies, or strangers. Bless and empower us that our minds and hearts turn toward the Dharma. Bless and empower us that our Dharma practice becomes the path. Bless and empower us that the path truly dispels confusion. And bless and empower us that the confusion itself dawns as primordial awareness. So we're going to work a little bit with this today, both in a little bit of the teaching and then in our practice. And, I love the complex simplicity of this tradition, of this lineage. The complex simplicity, simple but not easy. May all beings possess happiness and the inner causes of happiness. Such a beautiful, heartfelt intention. Not easy to achieve, right? But just so pure and beautiful. May all beings be free from suffering and the inner causes of suffering. Well, what do we mean by that? The first noble truth of dukkha tells us suffering exists, right? And it often gets misinterpreted because there's always the room for error with translation, but it often gets misinterpreted as life is suffering. That is not, in my experience from the teachings I've received, from what our Lama tells us, that is not what the First Noble Truth means. It does not mean that life is suffering. It means that in life there is suffering, that suffering exists. And this word dukkha gets misconstrued to say, Buddhism is the path, it's the practice of working with suffering because life is suffering. No. Buddhism is the path of recognizing and understanding that suffering exists. And it is a path of working with that suffering to alleviate it. Not working with that suffering to eliminate it. Suffering is part of life. Discomfort is part of life. And I can't imagine there's not one person sitting here right now who hasn't experienced suffering in their life. And suffering has many different degrees. You can be sitting outside enjoying a lovely barbecue and have a swarm of flies around you. That could be experienced as suffering. You could be dealing with a health issue. You can be going for a walk and not be properly clothed and feel cold. It's 17 degrees here today. So there's all different types of suffering. But life itself is not suffering. Suffering is part of life. And I think one of the beautiful parts of our practice is it gives us a chance to understand our relationship with suffering. Our meditation practice gives us a chance to be with it, understand where it comes from, understand what thoughts arise around our suffering, and what thoughts arise around how we respond to our suffering. So we're not saying let's eliminate suffering from our life. We're saying let's accept it all. Let's look at all. Let's expand our heart so wide and so open so that we can hold the truth of suffering exists alongside joy and happiness. And this practice invites us to get to know ourselves so well that we understand how we relate to and work with both. What's our relationship with happiness and joy? Do we allow it in? Can we receive it? What's our relationship with suffering and discomfort? Do we push it away? Do we wallow in it? Where does it come from? Where does it come from that some of us can be in the same room at the same moment, experiencing the same thing, and have a very different feeling of what's happening, have a very different perspective on that very same thing? So we're going to look at a little bit today our triggers. What are the triggers around suffering? What are the triggers around pain? And how can we work with it so that it can integrate into our fullest being, which is allowing all that is in the world to be, not trying to change it. I know for me, so much of my suffering comes from trying to change what's happening. It comes from trying to change, a family member who I have a difficult relationship with, who I love dearly. And, I find myself thinking, well, if only they could show up differently, then I wouldn't suffer. But I don't know, 48 years later, that hasn't worked out so well for me. I don't know if any of you have had some success with permanently changing a family member so that you no longer have to suffer. If you do, please put it in the chat. We'll take your advice. So, what I come back to over and over is, how can I work with myself, understand myself so well so that I can relate to the thing that triggers me in a way that causes me less suffering, or in a way that I can be accepting of what's happening, of what is. And so much, and I dare to say all of, but I'll go with so much, all of the things, so many of the things that trigger us are conditioned. And I'm not talking, we're talking about the middle way here. Like I'm not today going to dive into like serious trauma. We're talking about the everyday things that bug us, the everyday things. It's the holidays, regardless of what you celebrate. It's winter if you're in this hemisphere. There's all kinds of things that can come up this time of year that can cause us pain. And most of it has a story. Most of it started somewhere. It didn't start today. And what I love about this practice is the inquiry, is the curiosity, is the openness. Okay, how can I work with what's happening? How can I work with the fact that, I recently have been dealing with a health issue and I'm coming out the other side of it. How can I work with my disappointment that my mother made it about her? How can I work with the disappointment that she was more worried about telling everybody else that she was suffering because of my suffering rather than checking on me? Because I'm not going to change her behavior. And so we're going to do a little bit of a practice around curiosity, inquiry, creating some space around ourselves, and leaning into what is it that triggers us? What is it that gets us stuck? What is it that gets us caught? And then when we get caught, what do we do? What shows up for us? What are the behaviors that show up? What are the thoughts? What are the feelings? And then what are the actions? And what are we resisting? What are we resisting? And then all of this sort of cloached in this beautiful blanket of with no judgment, with not making any of it wrong. Even deciding you don't want to do it, that's not wrong either, right? So this is an invitation, it's not a direction. So you might sit and I might ask you to bring up some disappointments, discomfort, suffering that's coming up in your life now. And again, let's stick with minor to medium levels. And you may say, I can't do it. I'm frozen. I'm stuck. I don't want to. Don't make that wrong. That's okay. Okay, so then you have to be with what is. So if that's what's true for you, then we'll sort of shift and move your practice into an area that's available to you. Right? Because we don't suffer because we're bad. We don't suffer because we deserve to be punished. We don't suffer because it's just the way it is. We suffer mostly because of our own misunderstanding. We suffer because of our attachment. We suffer because of our aversion. We suffer because of our fear. And I would say we suffer because we mistakenly take that which is always changing to be permanent, or that which is not changing to be forced to change, rather than allowing, right? Allowing the spaciousness around us, allowing things to unfold, allowing people to be who they are. So when we mistake this openness, this spacious, wide openness of this universe of all that arises for being something solid and permanent, we get stuck. I get stuck. So the good news is, and this is what we'll practice with as well, is the second noble truth is that our craving, our desire, our aversion is what causes most of our suffering. And the third noble truth is that our practice, there's a practice here for us that can alleviate it. So I encourage you to just be curious and be open and see what comes up. And if what comes up is I don't want to, that's okay. You can just sit and be with whatever is coming up. All right. Any questions before we get started on that? We'll first start by settling in. We're not going to dive right in, so don't worry. So arrive again, stretch, breathe. Even just now, even just in the re-arriving, notice what's coming up for you. Notice if there's resistance. Notice if there's an aloofness. Notice if there's an excitement to dig into suffering. Whatever it is, just notice what is. From a loving, open, flexible space. So assuming your Buddha seat, remembering that it's not just your Buddha seat right now, it is yours always. Right this moment, nothing to do, nothing to look at, nothing to see. Just arriving, just breathing. Noticing the quality of your breath. Softening, opening. Feeling your physical body settle into your seat. Feeling your seat rising up to support you, hold you. For a moment, just tune into your body. And notice moving from your feet up through the top of your skull. Notice where you feel any tension or contraction. And notice where there's ease and flow and openness. Nothing to do or change, just notice what is. See if you can relax into your body a little more. Relax into your seat a little more, into the space around you. Attentive and awake, and yet relaxed. Just sitting, just breathing, and just being. Allowing whatever arises to arise. Thoughts, feelings, sensations, they arise on their own. See if you can just allow, just be with, without following, without doing. If you need something to focus on, turn your attention just slightly towards your out-breath, slightly more emphasis on your out-breath, on the letting go. soft, open, aware. With each exhale, allow the space around you to widen, to expand. Your awareness, like the bed of the ocean, wide, expansive, limitless, and that all that arises, like the waves, temporary. Your awareness immovable, innate, the arisings fleeting and temporary, like waves on the shore. From that space, I invite you to bring up something that hasn't already come up that brings about discomfort or fear or aversion, something that's workable. This practice is about working with what's happening so that when we go out into the world and our practice comes with us, we can work with what's happening. So to build that muscle, to condition this as a skill, as part of who you are, you need to start with something easier. It's like couch to 5K, don't stand up and go run the marathon. So right now my toes are cold. I'm going to work with that. So bringing that thing to mind, just allow the thought, the sensation, the feeling to arise within your field of awareness. And notice, what is the thought? What is the thought you have about it? And you may notice more than one thought coming up. You may even notice a hope or a desire coming up around it. Wishing it were different, wishing it weren't true, wishing it weren't happening. You may notice you want somebody else to fix it for you, or somebody else to be different. Just notice this wide, open mind of curiosity. What comes up around it? Staying with your breath. You can get curious about, where does that come from? Where does that thought come from? Why do I think it should be different? What do I hope for it to be different? And remembering that thoughts are just thoughts. We cannot stop them. But what we do with the thought, right? Do I choose to believe this thought? What do I believe about this thought? From a gentle, loving, non-judgmental place. View like the ocean, not like a cup of salt water, expansive, open. What happens if I don't believe this thought? What happens if I hold it more loosely? Just let it float out there, not as something that's true or not true or permanent, just what has happened in the moment. Deepening your breath. Breathing into it and around it. What happens if you soften to it? What happens if you say, this just is, nothing for me to do? Just let it float there, sit there. What happens if you bring a little bit of tenderness and softness to it? Even some compassion. And if that's not accessible to you, what about some humor? How can you lighten it? Again, settle back into your breath with a focus on your out breath, on releasing and letting go. And remember, there's nothing for you to do. Notice what happens. Notice if you're getting caught. And notice what catches you. Isn't that interesting? I have a belief about this. I have a fixed idea about this. I have a hope. Just let it be in that wide space. And without pushing it away or trying to make it disappear, I'll bring to mind something that brings you joy, that brings you happiness. Something that already is, not something you're seeking, it just is true right now. Relax into it. Feel into it, soften into it, be with it. Allowing the full truth of its essence, of its being, to just be. Notice with the same curiosity, what is your relationship to it? Can you allow it? Can you be with it? With no judgment. Are you seeking it? Are you looking it for to be more than it is? Or maybe you're having a hard time receiving it, feeling into the joy. That happens too. Again, just with loving, open curiosity. Just getting to know all these corners, spaces around us. And in this field of awareness, where you're allowing both your discomfort or fear and your joy and your happiness, allow them to be in space together. Expanding your breath, expanding the space around you to create enough space for all of it. And noticing you're not creating anything, it's already there for you. And now gently turn that gaze in towards the awareness that is awareing. Turning your gaze, turning your awareness in on itself. Who or what is aware of the sensations arising? Breathing into the space of that which is aware, of awareness itself. Ears open, eyes open, mouth open, heart open. Turning that awareness back out, including all. Remembering that you're not alone. Breathing in the love and the support of every single person who's practicing with you right now. Of every single person who is experiencing love and joy and happiness and fear and discomfort alongside you. See if you can take in that love and support. And on your out breath, breathing out love and support for every single person here with us now. Simultaneously giving and receiving. You can begin to invite in those who aren't sitting here, those that you love. Friends, family members, teachers, gurus. Widening the circle of love and tenderness and compassion, of togetherness. Gentle, tender, open and aware, receiving and radiating. And on your next in-breath, exhale out and ah. Again. And one more time from the depths of your belly, releasing all, receiving all, breathing in like you really mean it. We're going to close with Padmasambhava's path clearing and wish fulfilling prayer. We're just going to do it once today. Dusum Sanjay Guru Rinpoche Nudrup Kundak Dewa Chen Pojab Barche Kunsel Dudu Drak Posel So Wadep So Jingilap Tu So Chinang Sangwei Barche Jiwadang Sampalunji Druparjin Gilo. Precious guide, one with all the Buddhas of the 3 times, blissful presence and source of all spiritual accomplishments, fierce destroyer of illusion, who dispels every obstruction, we pray to you for blessing, inspiration, and realization. Please remove all outer, inner, and secret obstacles and spontaneously fulfill our aspirations. And we will close out here with the Bodhicitta dedication. Jamchuk Semchuk Rinpoche Makye Panam Kegyoshik Ke Panyam Parme Payang Gonne Gondu Pelwar Shok. May the pure, brilliant sun of Bodhicitta dawn in each and every heart and mind, dispelling the darkness of suffering and confusion unstoppably until all are illumined and awakened. Thank you all for your presence and your practice. Grateful for all of you, grateful for our lineage and for our dear, dear Lama Surya, who's made this all possible. And we pray for him and his continued health and prolific teachings in this world. I encourage you to continue to support Lama Surya in his mission. I put the link in the chat. So while he is not currently going to be running formal retreats, he is still out in the world, finishing his memoir, bringing his transmission to us. And as you all know, we are not set up, Lamas in the West are not set up like Lamas in the East. And so anything you can give, even if it's $1, I will continue to support him, and I humbly request you do the same. So any questions, you can raise your hand, you can put it in the chat. Any sharing? I have a question here. She says, you mentioned your mother. I have one of those too. It's one thing we all have in common. What guidance do you have about how to show up with compassion for those who we love, who appear to choose the path of suffering, when other paths seem to be available? It's a great question. And, I can share one sort of trick that I use. I don't know if trick is the right word, but it's what's coming to mind. I mean, first of all, in my practice, once I've dropped down to the space of my practice, I have much more space around me. It's much easier for me to bring in people who are difficult, so from my mother, who I do love dearly, but can't always share a space with physically. But I can share this space with her always and send her love. But to be more specific, I had a teacher once say to me, the boundary that you set for the people that you love can be measured by how much space does there need to be for there to be authentic compassion. And so what I noticed with my difficult relationship with my mother is I very, when I let the boundaries down, the minute that I start to lose compassion and start to find anger or irritation or judgment, I know that I've released that boundary too soon and need to set up a boundary with the intention of being able to cultivate that compassion authentically. Because not compassion as a thought or as a concept, but deeply, authentically in my being. And so, maybe she doesn't live near me, but maybe I find that we're talking too often. And so then I'll take a little bit of a break. And then once I can find that compassion again, I'll check in. What if we talk now? What happens to my compassion? The hardest part about that is they might not understand. And in fact, they might have a very strong reaction to it. So I also don't recommend necessarily that you tell them you're doing that. So I mean, the most simple answer is finding the deepest amount of space around you, whatever that space looks like, to be true, loving and true. Knowing that you can't change them. That's my best answer right now. Well, I wish you all a beautiful, beautiful day. Whatever you celebrate, I hope that you find love and ease and light. And sending all of my love to you and all that you love. And I hope to see you next week with Mama Surya. And please send a thought to him. His birthday is coming up here, December 26th. And so bring him in your prayers and wish him a long life on his birthday. Love to you all.